Welcome to Innovate presents Entrepreneurs in Tech. Today we're delighted to have our guest Tony Moroney. Did I pronounce it right? I don't want to
Absolutely.
sound amazing. Okay, Tony, thank you for joining us today. And could you please start by introducing yourself and providing us just a little bit about yourself before we really dive into it?
Delighted to be here. So thank you very much, Bob. I'm Tony Moroney. I live in
My
Dublin,
pleasure.
Ireland, but I work all over the world and travel quite extensively. I've been involved in business a long time, and I've been involved in many different ways. I suppose I was initially an executive working in business itself. I then switched to international consulting, and then I added in academia. So I think probably I have an interesting mix of business, academia, and consulting, and throw in a little bit of thought leadership on that. And then you have a sort of a different perspective coming together, which I think works well for people I work with.
Well, I guess you have all the proper or the right components if you want to start a business and make it successful. You have all the components, Tony. Tony, can we just go back a bit, back to your teenage years or beginning, and what really motivated you, and what was the driving factor behind what are you doing now? Like, what would initialize all this interest to say, hey, you know what, this is what I want to do in life?
Well, look, I suppose it's fair to say, Bob, when I was at school, we didn't have much technology. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have smartphones. So we have to put that in context. And when I was young, playing rugby was more important than probably anything else. But I wanted to work, and I got into work. I started at an early stage, and worked very, very hard. And I remember when technology was introduced to the business, and it was alien,
Hmm.
and people really struggled with it. And look, the reality is we know that some people still struggle with it today. And I'm talking about basic things like
Correct.
reading. So,
Yes.
technology wasn't part of my growing up because it didn't exist. Now, what we have seen in the last 20 odd years is just an explosion of technology. And in fact, one article that I sometimes share with my students is it was a headline in one of the English newspapers back in, I think it was 2000, saying, "This internet is a fad. It may never catch on as thousands abandon it." Right? And you think about where we are today, where the internet is just part of everyone's lives, and now
Yes.
we're talking about moving from Web 2 to Web 3, and total immersive experiences. So
And
we're in a period where we've seen more innovation, I think, in the last 10, 15 years, and in fact you could even say in the last 2 years, than we have seen in our whole lifetime. So it's a wonderful time to be around.
Absolutely. So, what I gather from this is that we could adapt as humans. Nothing is alien, nothing is foreign. We need to adapt to learn, and it becomes part of us. It's nothing, always the unknown is always scary. So once you adapt and learn it, it becomes part of us. Now look at it. We cannot live without internet or the web or whatever you want to call it.
Well, yeah, look, it's very Darwinian in terms of, look, it's not the strongest or the brightest. It's those who adapt best succeed. And we have seen big powerful firms disappear. We have seen people run out of tenure because they just could not change. So this is very much, as you say, Bob. This is
Mhm.
around understanding that we're in a constantly evolving world where the pace and the acceleration is unbelievable, and we need to be ready for that. But I also think we need to realize that actually no one expects us to have all the answers. We need to get comfortable that we
Correct.
don't have all the answers. And I think part of the problem is, look, when we look at organizations, typically they're run by people who are there with the most experience. Well, that's great, but if your experience has no relevance in today's market, that doesn't help. Right? And if we even think about the last 2 years, I mean, I think it was October 23, OpenAI made their announcement. Here we are, not even 2 years
Yes.
later, and everyone is talking about generative AI. Well, that wasn't in the vocabulary of management within boardrooms. It's now
Yes.
there,
Mhm.
squarely in front of everyone. So they can't be expected to know everything about it. But they do need to get their arms around it, and they need to understand, well, what does this mean for our business? And what does this mean in terms of being competitive and being relevant in the future? And that's what they need to do. They don't need to write algorithms, but they do need to know, well, what does this mean?
I guess that's why you became a permanent figure in the digital transformation and strategy world. From I see the way you adapt and you kind of evolve with it, and your message out there to a lot of the businesses that who struggle or who want to do it, who want to be part of that transformation. And can you just give us a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, so look, I think the biggest problem with digital transformation is the word digital. And the reason I say that, Bob, is because people hear the word digital and they immediately think this is a technology issue, and they don't hear the word transformation, which suggests actually this is a people issue. Right? So instead of setting out to transform the business, what they're actually doing in most cases, in my experience, is they're doing a digital technology implementation, which, a bit like an organ transplant, the body might reject because they haven't invested in their people to help their people understand how this is going to help the business, how this is actually going to help them
Yes.
as employees add value and be more creative and do things that are more interesting. Because the reality is, right, an executive stands up and tells the story about digital transformation. Well, the world is changing and we need to do digital transformation. And it's all very nice and plausible. But when people leave the room, they start thinking about, will I actually have a job? What will happen to my department? What does this mean for me? And if we haven't brought them on a journey in terms of, well, look, our customers are changing and what they expect us to do in the future will be things like this. Now, how we're going to get there is we're going to do a number of things that will bring us on that journey. That journey will, it'll modify as we go on the journey because we will learn and, we'll find out new things. But as part of that, we're going to retrain you and
Hmm.
we're going to give you new skills. So you will be very much part of this journey. Now, that's a very different proposition to one where you're wondering, are the management really talking about downsizing here? And they're just not saying it. So I think the big problem that we have is, organizations, they get obsessed with a digital technology. And look, AI is the latest one. We'll come back to that. But it doesn't matter what the technology is. And now they have an obsession around the technology as opposed to, well, why are we looking to transform in the first place? Because it's not because of the technology. Right? The technology at the end of the day is just a tool. And I would guarantee you, and they say over 80% of digital transformations fail. None of them failed because of the technology. They failed because of the inability of leaders to bring their people on a journey.
Yes, and that would lead me to my next question. Is really very clever what you just said. So, are you saying a lot of the big organization and small organizations they should invest in their staff, in their employees that carry them for years, all these years, and made them where they are right now
Hmm.
by having them invest money in teaching them and put them to classes, uh, ex- have them exposed to new technologies, understand it, adapt it, and give them the security and tell them, hey, this is something, an enhancement tools. Technology is an enhancement. It makes your life easier and better, and we can advance our business so you can work more effectively instead of running in circles. So, is it something that the corporate world or big organization or small organization not really kind of pushing that narrative towards their employees or the people that work for them or with them?
Well, I think it's multifaceted. So I think on one level, is it really owned by the top leadership team or is it owned by someone? Like, I often ask the question, well, who's responsible for digital transformation? And they say, well, that's Bob. And I say, okay, has Bob got the mandate to change the organization and has he got the budget to go with that? And they say, no, but he's working on these projects. So he's not really working, he's not really responsible for digital transformation. He's responsible for some projects. So the first thing is the whole executive need to own digital transformation. And there needs to be, look, organizations are brilliantly adept at figuring out if there's any chinks in the armor. So let's say you and I are on the exec team and someone asked you, so Bob, what's this digital transformation about? And you give an answer. And then 2 days later, they ask me. If they don't get the same answer, they realize actually this thing is not real. Because look, organizations bring in initiative upon initiative, and then fatigue sets in, and then cynicism sets in, and people don't believe this is real. But I think the other real important point here is that, look, let's say the executive buy in that, yeah, look, we need to transform because if we don't have a future. And they start to tell that
Yeah.
story to everyone. You have your young digital native employees saying, well, this is obvious. We should have been doing this years ago. But you got a big cohort of management in the middle who are now feeling threatened and vulnerable because it's alien. And they kind of hear what the exec are saying. They can see that there's young digital natives, ready to, chomping at the bit, ready to get going. And they're feeling very much alone, isolated, feeling that they can't cope. So we need to make sure that we don't create a digital divide within our organization. And to your point, that means we need to invest in our managers as well as all of our people, because they're the people are everyone meets. How often do they meet the board or the executive? Rarely. But if they're meeting the managers and the managers are feeling uncomfortable about digital transformation because they don't understand it, or they feel it actually puts their job at risk, that's not going to be a very encouraging environment for the rest of the employees.
Hmm. You mentioned something. A lot of companies right now in this digital age transformation or AI involvement or new era of technology, uh, they figured the best way is to cut down by get rid of people,
Mm,
get rid of workers, get rid of staff, which is
yeah.
I think is wrong, is extremely, extremely wrong. Extremely wrong. My personal opinion is instead of investing in the higher management up, where a lot of people make so much money, take part of that money and invest it in the people that who got you there. Educate them, you
Yeah,
know,
I think you're right. Look,
expose them to this new technology.
yeah, I think you're right.
They need to, and these are the people who's going to carry the company. These are the people who's going to really carry these companies or these organizations for years to come. you know
And Bob,
and
more
it's
than that, Bob,
creating a fear, and it's creating.
yeah, more than
I'm
that, they're
sorry.
the people who actually know your customers. They know what pain points your customers
Yes.
have. They know how to solve those problems for your
Correct.
customers. So what we need to do is
Yes.
augment them with the technology so that they can solve the problems better. Make sure that they're taking away those pain points for customers, making sure that conversations start moving to value add as opposed to problem solving. And I think, if we just look at, digital disruption, be it, AI or any other technology as a way of taking out costs, yeah, sure, but that's table stakes. Everyone will do that. Right. So now you're not creating competitive advantage. All you're doing is making sure you're not being disadvantaged. The real value comes when you can sort of say, well, actually, if we think about this is how we can add value to our business by creating new insights, by creating new services, by empowering our people to do better things for our customers. Now we're starting to talk about differentiation, not cost cutting, because cost
Yes.
cutting to me is not
Yes.
a strategy. It's an initiative,
No.
but it's usually a negative one.
And it's very temporary. It doesn't take you forward. It's very cost cutting is very temporary. It's not advancement at all. At all. It's just where you are for now. Then what's next? You cannot keep cutting costs. Keep cutting,
No,
cutting, cutting. You need to take some of that cost that you want to cut and invest it back into your staff or into your people or the army that behind you.
no, absolutely. Because look, if we can automate things that are repetitive and boring that no one wants to do anyway, and we can use that saving to invest in our people so they can add more value, right? Actually, that's a win-win-win, right? Because the customer is winning, the employee is winning, and the customer is winning, the company is winning. But if all we do is just take that and bring it to the bottom line, well, someone's
Yeah.
going to disrupt us, and we will be left behind. Because at the end of the day, what organizations need to do is they need to think about this from the customer in, not the organization out. Right? And if they're thinking about, well, if we understand our customers, really understand their needs and how they're evolving, that means we too need to
Mhm.
change. And we're going to have to invest in change to get there, because it's not like turning on the lights. Oh yeah, we're going to transform. Oh, we've done that. That doesn't work, right? We need to invest in the business. We need to invest in the systems. We need to invest in the culture, in the training, in the skill set. Right? But we need to have a vision of what we're doing, right? Because what's most important in my mind is if we understand why we need to transform, what's more important than anything else then is how do we get there? Because if we can answer how to get there, we will deal with things like, well, what technology, what process, what training, etc. But if we just go for point solutions, that's all they are. They're point solutions. Right? We haven't actually transformed. We've just grabbed a point solution, and then we're wondering, well, we built a new mobile web app. Why hasn't the organization changed? Well, we didn't set out to change the organization. You set out to build a mobile web app. So organizations need to be, much more holistic in their thinking, and they need to make sure they bring the people with them.
Yes, very correct. Well said, Tony. Definitely. Um, your role as a senator and a president of the STI Emerging Tech and Cyber Security Subcommittee
Yeah.
influence global innovation, innovation and investments in new technology.
Yeah, well, I think, look, the World Business Angels Forum is a G20 affiliate for financial inclusion. And really,
Yes.
the essence of that is around, how do we encourage entrepreneurship? Because entrepreneurship, creates, breakthroughs in economies, it creates jobs, it does all sort of wonderful things. And, I suppose what my role is, I represent, the World Business Angels Forum in Ireland. And funny enough, this week is World Business Forum Investment Week, where there is seminars all over the world. So I have one in Cork with the Digital Transformation Lab on Thursday, where we have people in the audience. We have a whole bunch of speakers in talking all about entrepreneurship. But the essence of it is around, how do we support entrepreneurs so they can do more to stimulate growth in our economies? And look, we need that more than ever. We don't want to end up where actually only a handful of companies control the world. We need to make sure that there's entrepreneurs coming through and challenging the status quo all the time. Because if we don't challenge the status quo, it's very easy to slip back. Right? And entrepreneurs, they are great. And look, I would say what we need to understand is, so when organizations are small and starting out, they're very entrepreneurial and they understand everything about their business. They understand their customers, they understand the pain points, etc. But as organizations get bigger, they then sort of become very, mechanistic. So, we need to have a silo for compliance, for, administration, for whatever it might be. And those silos then stop talking to each other, and the organizations continue to invest in becoming more efficient, but they're not sure why they're there in the first place. Right? So we need to make sure that we keep bringing entrepreneurs in who are all the time asking the question, yeah, but why? Surely we could do this, or look at that opportunity there. If only we could try this. And that's what we need to see all over the world. And it's a great way of, bringing people together, bringing people into the ecosystem where they can be very successful and they can help change the world.
Absolutely. Tony, as an international consultant and a speaker, do you see a flux of a new lot of new entrepreneurs entering this new era of technology that we are experiencing right now?
I think we need more. Although there are headlines around that we've more AI entrepreneurs have set up businesses in the last 12 months than anything else. But some of that, some of that, there was the cartoon from Tom Fishburne, the picture of the yacht, and its name was AI. The question was, how did you get the money? Well, just look at the name of the boat. I think, on a serious note, though, we need to see more entrepreneurs. We have loads of entrepreneurs at the fringe of everything. So, on blockchain, on
Yeah.
Web3, on AI or generative AI, etc. And it's a bit like, it's a bit like fintech and financial services in many respect, right? So you have lots of fintechs who have
Hmm.
great ideas, but they don't have a brand, and they don't have the money, and they don't have the resources. Right? And you have lots of incumbent financial services who have big brands, loads of money, loads of people, but not necessarily the initiative. Right? So you need both, and we need to
Hmm.
make sure that we're bringing more entrepreneurs into the marketplace, because the incumbents learn from the entrepreneurs. Right? They look and say, "Oh, that's really interesting what they're doing." And sometimes they buy them, which maybe is great for the entrepreneur, not maybe great for everyone else. But they look at what the entrepreneurs are doing, and it puts them under pressure, because it's a bit like sports. If you're in a league and there's a clear champion before the season even starts, it's not that good, is it? right? So you need to have a situation where there is always competition, because competition brings out the best in everyone. And if the competition is focused on doing
Yes.
right by the customer wins. And I think there's a role to support entrepreneurs, so like the World Business Angels Forum, but also for governments, for society. We need to encourage more entrepreneurship.
Yes, capital, definitely it's needed. Definitely it's the competition. It's really important. It's part of capitalism. It's part of growth. Great new ideas comes up always when there's a competition.
Mm.
Um, do you think that the future of the senior leaders of a lot of the big organizations are in a bit of their future is a bit threatened because of AI?
Well, they,
The
I
senior leaders of a lot of the
yeah,
big organization.
I would say, Bob, that AI won't take their job, but someone who understands AI will. Right? So I think it's incumbent on every
Hmm.
senior leader to understand AI and every other technology. And look, there was a great book from Harvard where they said, look, if English is not your first language, if you have a 30% proficiency, you will get by in work. Right? But they use that to say, well, actually, that means you should have a 30% proficiency in the language of technology, because no one expects a senior executive to know how to write an algorithm. What they do expect is a senior executive to understand, well, what does that do to our business and what outcomes does it drive for our customers, employees, and other stakeholders? Right? So I don't need to know how to write it, but I do need to understand what its impact is and whether that's a good impact and whether I'm happy that it is a right impact for all our stakeholders. So I think the challenge for executives is that, look, when I look around boardrooms and I look around exec teams, like myself, they were born pre the internet, they were born pre the smartphone. The executive education system was predicated on intense industry rivalry. Like, well, what's industry? Right? Because your
Hmm.
competition nowadays can come from anywhere. There are no barriers in most cases. So I think there's a challenge for execs in that the way we have been training and educating execs up to now isn't going to work into the future, right? Because if we think about
No.
business, the business models are changing. You got ecosystems, platforms, you got all sort of things going on. You got, all sort of technologies creating new ways of doing business. And in my mind, it's never one technology that disrupts. It's a confluence of technologies coming together that disrupts. And look, the metaverse is a perfect example. Everyone was talking about the metaverse 2 years ago, but they had this idea that it was about goggles. Actually, it's nothing to do with the goggles. Right? This is about immersive experiences. Right? So you're seeing everything from AR, VR, XR, spatial computing, metaverse, but they're all means to create an immersive experience for customers. And if we think about, there's 3.3 billion gamers in the world. And like if I think of
Yes.
America, look, there's 70% of 13-year-olds using Roblox. So do we understand the type of experience we're going to need to create for those customers in the future? Or the type of work environment we will need to create that can tap into the fact that actually they're used to collaborating in a digital world and sharing and building together. How could we harness that and make sure that that instead of them looking at our organization and saying, "Oh, well, I wouldn't like to work for them," that they're thinking, actually,
Hmm.
this is a very progressive organization, and I can see where this fits with the type of things I love to do. So I think the challenge for execs is, and I often ask a simple question in terms of, well, which social media apps are you using? And we take some of the ones like maybe Instagram or TikTok or whatever. Most execs don't know anything about them. And the question then becomes is, well, if we don't have to be an avid user or anything like that, but if we don't understand how the technology is being used by consumers, how then can we create an experience that's relevant for them? Because if they're spending their life over there and we're spending our life over here, right, there's going to be a disconnect. And that's where your
Yes.
entrepreneur will come along and say, oh, look, they're all over here. I'm going to build something that actually gives them the type of experience they're looking for.
Yes. I think a lot of the big senior execs, they should really kind of get re-educated on the current technology and what's happening and become more of take an active role, because there's a lot of absentee senior executive.
Yeah.
And I think they need to should I say, like the military. You got a general. He rolls with his troops. He's the first one to roll. He puts out his combat boots, rolls up his sleeve, got his hat on, and he goes into the battlefield with them. He's right there. So I think a lot of these corporate structure, corporate culture need to change a little bit. Beside educating the senior execs, they need to become to take a more active role working with their staff, beside educating them, understanding, because this is a new wave of new era we're entering. Because if
Yeah,
they don't, the company will fold, or they're going to be out of a job.
yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
it's going to take, it's a new, they need to restructure this whole corporate culture thing,
Yeah.
really.
And the first thing they need to do is restructure their mindset, right? Because going back to this point in terms of
Yes.
you can't be expected to have all the answers. So, instead of being there because I know everything, I'm now there because I have the wherewithal to work with all my people, work with all my troops to orchestrate the answers to come through the organization. And then what I need to do is I need to
Yes.
invest in myself by actually considering doing some reverse mentoring. So I'm going to get some of these young digital natives and I'm going to sit down with them on a regular basis and ask them, well, how would you go about this? Or how would you see this playing out for our customers? Or what is it that's important for customers
Yes.
in your mind? And start listening to them. Because the problem is, look, in organizations, typically as people go higher and higher, they tend to become more disconnected from the customer. Right? Or if they do know customer, it happens to be someone
Yes.
who's of the same era that they've known for 20 years. Right? How often do they meet your customers, ordinary customers of every age in the organization? They don't. So we need to create that space for them to learn from younger employees and not feel threatened by it. And there's a win-win in this because the younger employees start to understand the business better. They start to understand the market better. They start to understand risk better. So they become better future leaders, right? And hopefully they in turn
Right.
will engage
Yes.
in reverse mentoring because what they've learned actually starts to become redundant as well. So, I mean, as soon as we learn something, the world moves
Mhm.
on. And unless we keep reinvesting, we're already behind.
Yes. Correct. Um, how do you handle the ethical dilemmas of AI and cybersecurity?
Well, look, I'm glad you brought that up because it's a fascinating area. I mean, I often ask executives, so what sort of ethical policies have you in place for the responsible use of AI or other technologies? And there's kind of silence, right? And I think this is an
Hmm.
area that is highly problematic because there was a report out there recently that suggested that OpenAI was the number one unauthorized app used by employees all over the world. Right? And there was equally a report out from Microsoft and LinkedIn that said, look, employees of every age are using these generative AI tools, whether they're supposed to or not. And I think what we need to recognize is, look, we can say, no, you can't use these tools, but that's not how human nature works. Right? People are going to have these tools on their mobile phones. Right? The temptation to deal with something that's complex, or I need to write something to type it in, get a few prompts, well, you can see how it's going to happen. But if you haven't said, well, actually, let's recognize that as the real world, right? So now what we need to do is put in supportive guardrails that help people understand, what they can do, what they can't do, and why they can't do it. So we can't put in customer information because it goes into a learning model and then it's no longer the customer's information. All right, we can't put in our own proprietary information for the same reason. Get you right. But what we can do is we can be creative in there. We can look for ideas in terms of how would we talk to an audience about such great, right? But we also need to
Yes.
recognize that a bit like, just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. It's absolutely that case in the case of generative AI. Right? We need to recognize that just because generative AI will produce something doesn't mean it's right either. So we need to train our people to have the domain expertise, but also the critical thinking skills to be able to look at something and say, you know what, there's something not right about that, or mm, uh, there's parts of it I like, but I don't think that's consistent with the values of our organization. So I want to take this away and do something with it. So I think what we need to do is, create those guardrails that are supportive, and then educate our people how to best use them so they create real value for their organization and their customers.
Absolutely. Tony, it's funny how something negative, it's really accelerated us into the future. The pandemic, it kind of accelerated us into that digital transformation, AI, and all of that.
Hmm.
How is that in your view?
So look, I'm always amused by this one because when the pandemic hit, there was all these headlines, 60 years of digital transformation in 18 months, and things like that. And in reality, we didn't have the digital transformation.
Correct.
We had lots of digital technology sales, right? So licenses for Teams and Zoom and you name it, right? PCs. But
Yes.
what I think it did do is because look, let's think about it. If you walked into an organization 4 years ago and said to them, I was thinking we could get 90% of our employees to work from home, the board meeting probably would have been reasonably short, right? But what it did show is that
Yes.
actually, when we had no choice, we could change. Right now, we adapted to
Yes.
the pandemic. We're still adapting to the outputs of that pandemic in terms of changed mindsets because customers' mindsets have changed, employees' mindsets have changed, and there's a real battle going on at the moment in terms of, well, what is the right balance? Do people need to come back to the office, as some firms say, or is it no, you don't need to come back because actually we can give you all the tools and technology? But working from home is not digital transformation, it's just digitization because the work hasn't changed, it's just you're using different tools to do the work, right? So I think that created a bit of confusion, but underneath that, organizations started to realize that, well, actually, we could go about transforming this business in a positive way,
Mhm.
in a way that we want to, if we put our mind to it. And that's different than responding to a pandemic where,
Yes.
we're batten down the hatches and whatnot. So, organizations, every board member should be. I mean, I often ask board members the question around, well, so, you know, have you asked why the organization wasn't ready for this in the first place? Because all the tools and technologies that they use to bail themselves out of the problem, they've been there for years, right? And the reason the reason is simple. We get into comfort zones, right? We've always run the business this way. And look,
Yes.
why did we bring people to offices so we could industrialize it, we could improve communication, etc.? Well, actually, we can industrialize it remotely. We can improve communication remotely. We can do all those things, right? But the mindset hadn't changed. And I think rather than a rubber band syndrome where we just go back to where we were, the real question is, okay, how can we harness what we learned to bring about real and sustainable transformative change? And there's a difference between change and transformation. And I want to be clear on this, right? Change is, yeah, we made it faster or bigger or smarter or whatever. Transformation is sort of saying, actually, we have a vision for where we want to be into the future. And let's discuss how we're going to get there. Now, we understand the past, but we're not rooted to it. But we do understand the vision and we are focused on how we're going to get there. And that's the challenge for boards and executive teams. And they need to make sure they include their people in it because it's like everything else. You can have a great vision. Right? It's a bit like values. Values are written down on walls and in reports and everything, but in a lot of cases, no one lives by them because they're not enacted. Right? We need to make sure that our
Yes.
people own it and that transformation happens from the bottom up. So our role then becomes, well, actually, how do we lightly or loosely steer the ship, right? Knowing that everyone is on board, bringing it to where we want to get to because they want to get there.
It's interesting that really very important point, the difference between change and transformation. And he explained it. It's really interesting. It's extremely true. Yes, there's a
Mhm.
big, big difference. And a lot of people think change is transformation, which is not. Definitely not.
Yeah, but
Um,
it's worse than
and he
that.
had, please.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think digitalization, and digital transformation are the same thing as well, and they're not. Right? So this is back to your point in terms of COVID. Like, okay, our people are working from home using PCs. That's not digital transformation. I mean, the work hasn't changed. That's just moving from analog to digital. Right? Digitalization, to my mind, is well, okay. I always use Uber Eats as a great example. They used to bring people, now they bring food, and now they bring medicine, now they bring something else. They're looking at, okay, how can our technology add new value? Transformation is different. That's back to, what you were just saying. That's around, well, actually, we have a vision for what this business looks like in the future. And the thing is that, look, if we think about the world, we got our historical view of the world. So we got hindsight. And that's great in terms of understanding where the organization
Yes.
came from and our culture and all those type of things. We got insights, but everyone has those insights. I mean, everyone knows about AI. Well, great, yeah, but that's not going to do anything for you, right? Other than, you need to do something
Hmm.
with it. The real trick is foresight. How do you figure out, well, actually, if we take all this into account and make sense of it, right, what's the future going to look like? And then how do we bring that back to today? And that becomes the transformation plan, right? Because we now have a
Yes.
sense of what the future looks like. But if all we're doing is responding, that's just tinkering around at the edges and hoping for the best.
Tony, nobody, I guess, could give better advice than you in that section. What would, what's your advice for the aspiring leaders in the digital transformation and fintech based on your experience? What advice you would give them?
Well, look, a couple of pieces. First, always start with the customer. This is about customers. We don't transform because of technology. We transform because we want to be the partner of choice for our customers. Right? So if we're not relevant or
Hmm.
competitive, we're gone. The second thing to realize is this is all about people. It's not about technology. Right? As I said at the start, it's most unfortunate it's called digital transformation. Why don't we just call it transformation? Right? Because if we don't go on a transformative journey with our people and they want to be part of it, it will fail. I guarantee
Hmm.
you it will fail. Look, I
Yes.
have been in organizations, where they do everything in their power to make sure it doesn't succeed, and that doesn't mean they have to be obstructive. It just means they don't engage. Right? I've also been in
Correct.
organizations where you get the spreadsheet culture. Well, no one uses the system, and they all use their own repository of information, and no one knows what the truth is, but everyone has their own version of the truth. Right? So if your people don't own it, it's not going to work. And for them to own it, they need to understand what's in it for them. And they need to understand that actually the organization has a future and that they have a future in the organization if they so wish. Right? And they need to understand that as part of that transformation, their skill set will also be transformed. So now they're feeling that actually this is something I want to be part of. And then we need to unleash them. Don't feel as leaders that we need to have the answers because we were not trained or educated to deal with the disruption that we face because there's new things being invented every day and there's technology we built on technology on top of other technologies and other dynamics. They're not just technology ones. So we can't be expected to know everything. But we can be like the football manager, I suppose. We can be expected to understand how to get the team to play best so that the team
Yes.
succeeds. And that's what it's about.
Correct. Absolutely. Can we talk about you being a member of the World Smart Cities Economic Development Commission? Please tell us about that.
Well, look, yeah, that's part of the World Business Angels Forum. And that's around trying to understand, again, it's back to entrepreneurs. How do we encourage entrepreneurs to be part of the solution for smart cities? Because if we look at urbanization, there's more and more people living in cities. Cities are under huge pressure. And, we got, housing problems everywhere where there's not enough houses or they're too expensive, whatnot. We got, demands in terms of, sustainability, taking out, carbon out of the cities, taking cars out of cities. We can't expect to just make it happen overnight. So we need to make sure that entrepreneurs are looking at this as an opportunity because there's so much that can be done. And if you create
Yes.
a vibrancy amongst entrepreneurs who are sort of saying, actually, I have some ideas in terms of how we can make a smarter city. Right? Now you're starting to make progress. Because if we just sit back and sort of say, well, we did a big tender last year and we're waiting for results of that, that'll get you so far. But what if your entrepreneurs are just doing things and they're making things happen and you're actually able to support and harness that? Now you can start to make progress. So look, the World Business Angels Forum is very much in the space of if we can help and educate, um, entrepreneurs to be part of the solution, isn't that a great result for everyone?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. You traveled a lot. What do you, in your opinion, what is really which cities in the world, or the number one city, in your opinion, that really a smart city in our current times right now?
Well, I did get invited, but I couldn't go at the time. Singapore, by all accounts, leads the way. But look, it is interesting. There was a report out there recently that suggested that, the smart cities really were emerging in Europe and the Far East. So places like Zurich and
On the Far
Singapore and
East.
whatnot. I think the problem is that, look, when you have cities like so I'm in Dublin. So Dublin is a Viking settlement. So Dublin's over 1,000 years old.
Yes.
And it wasn't designed for the population it has today. I'm sure when it started out, it maybe had a few hundred people or something, but now it's got 1.5 million people in the greater Dublin area. And what happened was it was built by iteration. Let's stick this piece on and reclaim that and stick this over here, whatever. The real difficulty for cities that are around a long time is, well, okay, we wish we weren't starting from here, but we are. How do we actually start to make some meaningful change? And I think there's a balance in this, because if you just stop people driving their cars and put in bicycle lanes, that can actually create resentment. We need to find clever things we can do, and actually we need to invest in infrastructure in parallel, so that actually there's clever
Yes.
things that we can do as cities where everyone starts to buy into, actually this is good for the environment, it's good for my city, and it's good for me too. But it's a journey, and every city is on
Yes.
a journey. I think if you're starting a brand new city from scratch, you can
It's
build it
easier.
perfectly with the
Yes.
knowledge that we have today. Because I'm sure in 10 years' time, someone
Yes.
will say, if only you had thought of, right? But we could do a great job building a from scratch city today. But that's not the
Yes.
reality that most cities face. Most cities, they've grown over a period of decades, and they're not designed well. The infrastructure is not great. There's all sort of problems, and they're not eco-friendly. So we need to find a way of getting there, and we need to encourage innovation, because you can't tax everyone to pay for it. Right? Because
No.
then you will have people saying, "Oh, here, hang on a minute." So we need to find clever ways of being able to enhance what we have and make it better.
Tony, any upcoming goals that you're excited about or project that you would like to mention? Whether it's an advisory role, education, or new ventures that you're getting involved with for people to look for in the upcoming month or two this year.
Well, actually, I'm doing a lot of stuff at the moment around helping people to
Yeah.
understand how generative AI fits into their world, right? And I think there's
Hmm.
we've touched on some of it already in terms of from an ethical and responsible basis, but equally, it has to be from the perspective of how can we create real value, right? Because if and unfortunately, look, the headlines in the newspapers are, oh, it's going to reduce workforces by 20% or whatever the number you want to pick, right, depending on the journalist, right? But that's not. It's a bit like our conversation on digital transformation. Well, that's great. Your employees are looking at you sort of saying, so am I going to be replaced by a robot? Right? What we need to do is we need to sort of say, well, look, one of our problems is if we think about the single view of the customer, right? How many
Yeah.
organizations really have a single view of the customer? Because they don't. Right? Because the data is being collected all over the place. It's stored in different places. They don't talk to each other, etc. Right? So organizations are now starting to realize that actually, you know, we can do a lot with AI, but first we need to sort out, our mindset. We need to sort out our data. We need to sort out our data infrastructure. We need to make sure that we have, the ethics and safeguards in place. And then we need to understand that actually, if we could bring about, insights, how then could we use that to create value and to transform our business? And I think that's a really exciting area, because
Yes.
look, digital transformation always amazes me, because I can go into any boardroom, I guarantee you this, and ask them what they mean by digital transformation. And if they all wrote it down, I'd get a different answer from practically everyone in the room. And it's the same with AI transformation, because AI is just another technology. So it doesn't matter, what technology you want to use, whether it's AI or something else. It is all about transformation. right? But we need to make sure we understand what journey we're on, why we're on it, and how we need to get there, right? Not be obsessed with the technology, because if we're thinking about Gen AI because it can write a great poem about my dog, well, that's not really going to help the business. If I'm thinking about Gen AI as a way of actually pulling together disparate insights on my customers so that I can have a conversation with them that's relevant to them, that's appreciates my history with them, that's able to preempt what their needs might be, well, that's a different proposition. Or if I'm thinking about, well, look, I love this one in terms of like the call center, right? Call centers in a lot of organizations, they're just cost centers with spurious KPIs in terms of what customers are really calling about. What if your technology could say, well, let me tell you why your customers are really calling. Let me tell you how they feel about your organization. Let me tell you whether they got the right information before they left the call. And let me tell you how they felt about the organization when they left that call. Now it's starting to become the pulse of the organization. So I think there's there's a big mindset shift starting to emerge that realizes that data is it's not the new oil. I've heard people use the new oil. Actually, it's the blood system. It's the blood flow system, because it hits every part of the organization. It's reused time and time again. And really what we need to do is start thinking of our organization as a living being in many respects, where we're starting to understand each part of it and how it all comes together, so that we're creating real value for customers and making sure that we will be relevant and competitive in the future.
Absolutely. Tony, before we end this amazing, interesting, informative, and insightful interview, what simple advice you will have for future entrepreneurs, as you are an international speaker, corporate advisor? My God, the list will go on and on and on. As a consultant and a big advocate for entrepreneurs and technology, what simple advice for our viewers and listeners who's going to watch this and they're going to be extremely inspired by you, by your energy and your approach and your vision, and this, like, yes, there is a chance we could do this, I could do that. Please.
Well, thank you, Bob. I would say, look, always be curious. Right? You have to have a curious mind, because look, what we know today is irrelevant tomorrow. Right? Well, maybe not quite irrelevant, but it's gone stale. So we always have to have a curious mind. And look, we need to be able to balance, being curious with execution. We need to be able to do both. And in many respects, our greatest challenge is to be of that ambidextrous mindset, where we're all the time looking at the future in terms of what the possibilities might be, but at the same time, we're moving our organization forward. So we're trying to bridge the present to the future,
yes,
but make sure we don't drop the ball in the process, because if we're too focused on the future, we won't get anything done. If we're too focused on today, we miss the future. So we need to manage both.
Absolutely. Great advice. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been extremely insightful and amazing. Thank you for joining us on Innovate Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech. We're definitely you're an entrepreneur also. And be sure to connect with us on social media. Till next time, I would say keep innovating and stay curious. As Tony said, and I say, stay curious and take care.
Thanks, Bob.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share Innovate Presents Entrepreneurs in Tech podcast. And if you're joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.